Hi everyone, this is part 10 of my series on Jesus. This video is like the heart of the whole series, where I focus on what was the spirit, the essence of Jesus's message. Check out more of my writings, poetry, essays, etc. at my website, and you'll find the first video in this series linked below. I recommend you watch this series on Jesus in order. Hope you enjoy. In the last video, I described the process of how the Christian church codified, organized, standardized, and pruned down the exuberant diversity of the early, what we could call Jesus movement. So I explored how this person, Christ, in all his mysterious charisma, became this institution of the Catholic Church. I finished that video on the metaphor of Christianity as an oyster shell and Christ as the pearl inside. So the idea is the oyster shell sort of preserved the real pearl of a message that's hidden in there. This video is sort of the core of this whole essay. In this video, I'm going to talk about what is that pearl? What is that essence of Christ's message that glows in the Gospels? It's called pearls. As it turns out, the Church Fathers didn't do too badly in their selection of the Gospels. Scholars are unanimous in believing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to be among the earliest, if not the earliest, Gospels of Jesus. Yes, they've been tweaked in places. An ending was added to some versions of Mark's Gospel, a little insertion in Luke's. Here and there, the wording was likely changed to align the text more closely to what was becoming the officially sanctioned view of Jesus, emphasizing, for example, Mary's virginity or Jesus as the Son of God. Given how much editing, selecting, deleting, translating, and copying has gone on under the influence of Orthodox authorities, it shouldn't surprise us to find some evidence for their version of Jesus in the 4 canonical Gospels. That evidence doesn't need much explaining. Bishops and rulers liked the message. Christ is God, born from a virgin, who died for your sins. Believe in him and be redeemed. We'll fill you in on the details. It's the other material in the Gospels that needs explaining. It's Jesus' actions, parables, and sayings that defy misogyny, authoritarianism, and conventional wisdom. It's the words and deeds that confound simplistic thinking, those that are irreverent, spontaneous, mysterious, and even absurd. It's the stuff that would surprise a young man like me who opened up the Gospels expecting to find a cartoon. That all this stuff remains in the Gospels, despite its potential to embarrass popes, means it was simply too powerful to leave out. Whoever wrote about Jesus, even if they heard about him secondhand, couldn't not write those things down. And even those in power couldn't bring themselves to delete them. So what is all this other material that needs explaining? Jesus is vital, for one. Incredibly tender, yes. A healer of the sick, a comforter to the poor, the outcast, the vulnerable. But he is also fierce. He gets angry. He may suffer little children to come unto me, but he doesn't suffer hypocrites or nitpickers or any brood of vipers who miss the forest of divine love for the trees of human rules and regulations. And he would welcome the chickens squawking away in the background, ruining my recording. Okay, back to the essay. In contrast to the stuffy disapproval that Paul tries to sugarcoat with polite diplomacy, Jesus doesn't try to hide his emotions. His channels are open. He flares when he flares, and then it's over. Unlike so many well-intentioned people, Jesus doesn't seem to carry resentment around and then need to compensate for it by proving how nice he is. He's not passive-aggressive. He's active-aggressive, sometimes. Jesus' spirituality is not wispy and vague. It's fully integrated into his powerful personality. His aggression is in the service of truth. Along these same lines, we can say that Jesus is not interested in abstractions. He appears to agree with the visionary poet William Blake that whoever would do good to another must do it in minute particulars. General good is the plea of the scoundrel, hypocrite, and flatterer. Close quote. We see this most strikingly in his many encounters with sick or otherwise afflicted people. He is not too busy to heal you, whoever you are, when you present yourself with your specific, selfish request. I just want to feel better. He responds with warmth in the moment, not with moral calculations. Mark recounts how a woman dribbled expensive oil on Jesus' head to honor him. Quote, "A few of those present were indignant. Why did she waste that oil? She could have sold it for more than 300 denarii and given the money to the needy." They went on scolding her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you give her such grief? She did something special for me." Rules and regulations are abstractions too. While they can be helpful, Jesus insists they be seen in the context of something greater, the human heart. 3 of the 4 Gospels tell the story of Jesus' disciples being upbraided by Pharisees for picking grain to eat on the Sabbath, something prohibited by Mosaic law. Jesus tells them, quote, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." In another instance, Jesus is aroused to both compassion and anger when he heals a man's paralyzed hand on the Sabbath, and then gives an earful to the nitpicking Pharisees who are watching and waiting to pounce on any technicality. If morality means holding back a bad urge and being good, regardless of how we're actually feeling, then Jesus was not that interested in morality. The changes he spoke for were deeper than the bland concepts we all know how to pay lip service to. A rule is an embodiment of this superficial definition of morality, an external constraint or band-aid on the unwanted. When an adult, for example, tells a child to say they're sorry and the child repeats the words, a social ritual is performed. A ritual that allows business to carry on as usual, but moves nothing within. Jesus saw no need to flout rules unnecessarily. Asked if Jews should pay their taxes to Rome, he said yes. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. Rules, in other words, keep things civil so that we are free to focus on what's important, what's happening in our heart. In Matthew 5:22, Jesus tells his followers, "You have heard it said long ago, don't commit murder. Anyone who does will be damned." Well, I'm saying that anyone who gets angry with his brother will be damned. A few lines later, he says, "You've heard it said long ago, don't commit adultery. But I say that anyone who looks lustfully at a woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus is not arguing that we somehow peer into another's psyche like thought police and then string them up if we find anger or lust. He's pointing out that the things we don't want to happen, in this case murder and adultery, have their origins within us as feelings. He's pointing to this inner landscape as the realm where real change takes place. It has been clear for 2,000 years where our superficial approach to bad behavior has gotten us. Human depravity is so ubiquitous that most people see it as inevitable, a relentless force that can never be subdued, only condemned and punished over and over and over. But Jesus isn't interested in playing whack-a-mole with evil. He taught and embodied an approach that goes to the source. On earth, as it is in heaven, can be read in this context not as an abstract religious statement, but as a psychological truth. We can't help but manifest in the visible outer world the true state of our invisible inner world. Christ echoes the same idea elsewhere. There is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. And again, a good tree won't grow bad fruit, and a bad tree won't grow good fruit. Does anyone really ever hide their anger, lust, or insincerity? Does a forced apology fool anyone? Jesus' impatience with our perpetual bullshit is understandable. Who, after all, do we think we're kidding? Graphic images like fruit trees help Jesus avoid other ways that we modern Westerners like to kid ourselves. How easy to get lost in a forest of cerebral philosophy, only to emerge with nothing but a vague feeling of superiority and a PhD. Jesus preferred stories that cut through artifice and awaken a deeper knowing. We can, I think, accept most of Christ's parables as authentic, for they tend to have the ring of the unconventional, if not the surprising and mysterious. It's hard to imagine any straight-laced priest inventing them for the sake of keeping his flock in line. Aesop offered those kinds of stories. In one of his fables, a grasshopper plays while an ant works to save up food. When the winter comes, the grasshopper sees his mistake. The fable is simplistic and the moral obvious. It's clear that Aesop's calculating brain has constructed the story for a calculated end. Christ's parables are different. They are sometimes simple, but rarely simplistic. They don't lend themselves to predictable moral lessons. They seem to spring from somewhere under the brain. In one, the owner of a vineyard hires workers at 1 denarius for a day's work. Later, with only an hour left in the workday, he hires more workers for the same pay. The first workers gripe, "You've made those latecomers equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." The owner reminds them, "Didn't you agree with me for a denarius?" This one must speak to me in particular. I got emotional. Didn't you agree with me for a denarius? Or do you begrudge my generosity? In another parable, a father forgives the prodigal son who spent all his money in wild living, while the responsible son grumbles. The grasshopper and the ant, this ain't. Teaching the rewards of hard work is not, it turns out, anywhere in Jesus' lesson plan. He doesn't walk around ancient Palestine pitching in with the peasants to dig wells or carry stones. He does the opposite. We hear how he beckoned to two sons in the middle of helping their father mend their fishing nets to come follow him. We hear of a certain Martha who gripes about doing all the work to serve Jesus and other guests, while her sister sits adoringly at Jesus' feet. Lord, don't you care that my sister left me to serve alone? Asked Martha. Ask her to help me. Jesus answered her, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but only one thing is needed. Elsewhere, in a similar spirit, Jesus explains that feasting, not fasting, is the appropriate behavior as long as he's around. This is, after all, the man who turns water into wine, not vice versa. Generosity, abundance, gifts given freely, cares and worries let go. A kind of divine nonchalance illumined by love. Everywhere, this is Jesus' message. Paul, in his letter to the Thessalonians, reminds them of how he, quote, worked night and day so as not to be a burden when he stayed with them. Paul set up shop as a tent maker wherever he went. By contrast, Jesus freely accepts hospitality. He needn't prove his generosity. He seems to be generosity itself. He's not embarrassed by a woman who expresses her love by washing his feet. He receives the gift graciously, and later will himself wash the feet of his disciples. He's not looking to gain brownie points the way so many of us do by pointing out how busy we are or how insane work has been. Jesus preserves his sanity by staying open to something more expansive than the scarcity consciousness that most of us scurry around in and call living. The chickens agree with me. Hold on, I want to stop the recording for this final quote of the section. So I'll back up for a second. Jesus isn't looking to gain brownie points the way so many of us do by pointing out how busy we are or how insane work has been. Jesus preserves his sanity by staying open to something more expansive than the scarcity consciousness that most of us scurry around in and call living. My yoke is easy and my burden is light, he tells his disciples. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or what you will wear. O ye of little faith. In the next section, I talk about just that, faith. What did Jesus mean by it?